Send No Money, Philip Larkin. Let's read the poem first. Standing under the fobbed, impendent belly of time, tell me the truth, I said, teach me the way things go. All the other lads there were itching to have a bash, but I thought wanting unfair, it and finding out clash. So he patted my head, booming, boy, there's no green in your eye. Sit here and watch the hail of a current's clobber life out to a shape no one sees. Dare you look at that straight? Oh, thank you, I said. Oh, yes, please, and sat down to wait. Half life is over now, and I meet full face on dark mornings the bestial visor, bent in by the blows of what happened to happen. What does it prove? Sod all. In this way I spent youth, tracing the trite and transferable truss advertisement, truth. Okay, so what was going on in Larkin's life at this time? Well, he was approaching his 40th birthday and he still felt something of a disappointment and a failure, having doubts about his relationship with Monica Jones and not willing to marry her, having another relationship, though non-sexual, with a woman called Maeve Brennan. And he wrote to her and said, "What strikes me most is that hardly any of the things that are supposed to happen or be so do in fact happen or are so." That's very relevant to this poem because here we have a poem infused with melancholy and bitterness. There's a sense, isn't there, that the life is wasted, unfulfilled promises of time, and also that the best of his life is over and he has very little to show for it. Unlike most of Larkin's poems, this one isn't rooted in an everyday experience that then leads to a rumination and a philosophical consideration. In fact, this one begins with the personified conversation with this figure of time, this big-bellied figure, and then a consideration of what time has shown him. You'll notice as we look at the poems, let me show you one of the stanzas here, that they're written in octets. That means an 8-line stanza. However, each stanza is sort of split into 2 as well. The first lines there, as you can see, fobbed, time, said and go. They don't rhyme, there's no rhyming there. However, the second 4 lines do have an A-B rhyme scheme. So we have there and fair, bash and clash. The effect really is to create an almost conversational piece between time and Larkin, and then with Larkin's reflection on what he's been told. Let's consider the title. What does that mean, Send No Money? In the 60s, you might see adverts like this in the back of newspapers or magazines, and they promised some miracle product, like, for example, a truss, which is a kind of girdle or corset for a man. And you didn't need to send any money, they said. You know, you can have the product, have a look at it, see if you like it, and if you don't, send it back. And no payment required. However, they were pretty much a scam because when it came down to it, you couldn't really send the product back at all, or it was very difficult to send it back or very expensive to send it back. So people tended to keep them and then had to pay for them. Often they were quite expensive too. So the point Larkin is making is that life is a bit like this, or time is a bit like this. It promises you something wonderful, something amazing. However, that promise is often just a sham, just a scam rather. And actually, what you get is a rather costly mistake. Let's have a closer look. It starts here then with Larkin imagining himself standing as a young man looking up at this personification or this personified version of time. He's standing under this huge personification of time here, like a child looking up perhaps at a parent. Time is described, this sort of humanised version of time is described as being fobbed. Now, fobbed means, or refers to rather, a fob watch. You've probably all seen the White Rabbit in Alice in Wonderland, and we have that waistcoat with the little watch on a chain, and then you put the watch into the waistcoat pocket. You associate that image really with older men, older, wealthy, rich, kind of fat men. That's the image that's given. That is then extended with this word impendent, which means overhanging. So we have this image of a big-bellied time with his fob watch stuck into his waistcoat pocket. Larkin's very clever here. He often does this. He brings abstraction down to a very concrete and visible level. So time is something abstract. It's something we can't see, along with other concepts in this poem like life and truth as well. They're not things we can see or touch. They're not tangible. But what Larkin very cleverly does here is he presents time as not entirely human, but as kind of having distinct and concrete attributes that we associate with human beings, like bellies and watches and so on. So the fobbed watch and the big belly gives it a very physical existence, although it's rather a grotesque image too, isn't it? Time as this big fat rich person. We then hear that time is going to teach the poet something. He says, I said, teach me the way that things go. So he's going to teach the poet about life. This is an image really of a sort of slightly comical older authority. There's a sort of strange, mocking, serious tone here, which is sustained by the use of the young man's slang. So we have this image of time as this older, portly gentleman, respectable gentleman. And the poet or the speaker here is using young men's slang. For example, he says here, all the other lads were itching to have a bash. So lads and bash, quite colloquial speech. So colloquial refers to speech that is the kind of thing you might hear spoken rather than written, generally speaking. So time, he's basically saying, you know, all the other lads around me, all the other people my age, they're desperate to have a go at life. They can't wait to start making mistakes and get stuck in. But Larkin says, interestingly, he says, but I thought wanting unfair. What he means there is ambition. He thinks ambition is a little unfair. And he wants to be safe, I think, from the bash and the clash of the other young men. So he decides that he's going to sit back and let life happen, see what time or fate has mapped out for him. So he's going to sit back and let the other lads have a bash, but he's going to sit back anxiously rather than jumping in and seeing what's going to happen. The having a bash is a bit naive as well, isn't it? It suggests youth and innocence and kind of desperate to have a go. In the second stanza here, we have a rather patronising patting on the head to start with. But again, we continue, therefore, don't we, with this materialising of the immaterial. We hear about him patting the head, suggesting he has a hand, and we hear of his booming voice as well. He says, booming boy, there's no green in your eye. What that means is, you don't have any youthful innocence, do you, says time. You're not like the other lads, waiting for a bash, waiting to get stuck in. You don't have green in your eye. Why green? We associate green often with envy, but in this context, I think green is more likely to mean youthfulness. Green we associate with spring and life and new life. So here, our speaker doesn't have that youthful innocence, really. He's just going to sit back and watch the hail of occurrence clobber life out. That's what time tells him to do. So what does that mean? Well, again, it's another colloquialism, isn't it? Watch the hail of occurrence clobber. So you've got the word clobber life out. What this means is a metaphoric sort of idea of fate being turned into something concrete. So fate is the hail, basically the things that happen in life, the hail that comes down on you can't do anything about it. And then we have this fate clobbering people's lives, almost like beating them into a certain shape. The idea of fate here, hail, clobbering us into something that can be given a particular shape. But then Larkin says it's a shape that no one sees. It's it's another way of making the something abstract, like fate, actually sound physical and real and tangible. The idea of fate being able to clobber and to shape something in this way. Time then dares the speaker to sit as a passive bystander. And Larkin happily agrees. He's actually quite obsequious about it. In other words, he's a bit almost it sounds a bit creepy, doesn't he? He says, "Oh, thank you, yes, please." But it also sounds quite childlike too, doesn't it? Emphasising his innocence and naivety, and probably the innocence and naivety all of us face when we're against time. We think we have all the time in the world, don't we? But it soon runs out. The suggestion is that Larkin, given the opportunity to shape his destiny for himself, like the other lads, desperate for a bash, he actually preferred in his youth, which he now regards as his past, to just sit back and take whatever life throws at him. So he sits down and waits. In other words, just waits to see what happens in his life. However, by stanza 3, we learn that half his life is over now. And he learns he has not actually evaded any suffering. By sitting back and not getting stuck in, he still had misery and suffering in his life, just like the other lads. And he reflects on this. Now in the present, he looks in the mirror. So I meet full face on dark morning. So as he approaches 40, he walks up to the mirror and he has to face up, doesn't he, to what life has done to him. So there we have the full face on dark mornings. Well, face, he's looking at his own face, but he's also facing up to what life has done to him. And when he looks in the mirror, he actually sees his face kind of distorted into an animal mask. So you have the bestial visor. The word bestial refers to animal and visor like a mask. So when he looks in the mirror, he sees this sort of animal-like face, grotesque, distorted face looking back at him. We then have this wonderful plosive alliteration by the bestial visor, by the blows of what happened to happen. And we also have the word bent as well. So we have 3 words with the b sound. Now that b is what we would call a plosive. It's also a bilabial plosive. Now, bilabial means that you use both lips to make the sound. P is another bilabial plosive sound, isn't it? B and p. You have to close your lips. M and W, w as well. The w sound, you have to do it as well, don't you? So we have this kind of hard plosive b sound there too. The visor has been dented and damaged by the hail of occurrence. This basically means that the things that life has thrown at him, while he has remained passive and allowed time to take its course, it's as though really he's the butt of time's joke. He may as well have had a bash, because the fact that he just sat back means he's now very disillusioned with life. Nothing interesting has happened. It seems that the end of your life, or what happens in our life, is the same either way, whether you're a spectator like Larkin in this poem, or you're one of the lads getting stuck in and trying to make your own fate. Either way, life will be a disappointment and a disillusionment to you, whether you're actor or spectator.